to certification in Russia. Well, what is ISO 15480 certification? This standard common criteria of assessment of protection of information system and common criteria jargon. It was an attempt to unify format of requirements to functions, security functions of the hardware and software, and the first attempt to unify methodology of certificational tests. There's an international common criteria recognition agreement in the framework of which we provide common acceptance of certificates, and participants of this agreement consist of two groups. First, full-scale participants, those who have the right to produce their certificates received in a framework of all the CCRA activities, and countries acceptors which don't produce certificates. They produce certificates only for their countries, but at the same time, in unilateral mode, they receive certificates of other organizations. Several times, Russia was thought to be participant of this system. We were proposed the role of only acceptor and stack of Russia. I didn't like that. That's why we have only a local system of certification. We don't accept other certificates, and they don't take our certificates as well. Formally speaking, if you would like to receive an international certificate, you can come to the test lab system of certification of any countries participants of this process, and you can certify yourself up to the 4 level of trust produced in this country. It will be accepted by all participants of this agreement, but there are certain peculiarities. YAL2, you can come without any questions, and this application will be accepted. But if you would like to go to the level number 3, level of trust, and they have requirements to the protection of the environment, development environment, then they have formal requirements which Russian companies are not able to fulfill, such as requirements to compliance to a certain profile of protection, local protection in the country where the scheme of certification is being done, and mass of small peculiarities, including requirements to how the process of development should be organized. Well, good. We have defined that we would like to certify ourselves. We should select a country where we will certify ourselves. And there are several stumbling blocks. The first indicator is the proximity to the sales market, and for us the main initiator of certification was our Southern Korean department, because notwithstanding the fact that Samsung is a commercial company, they were first ones who said to us that we're ready to buy Max Patrol if you will have certificate ISO 15480. Due to the fact that we've been speaking about the Korean market, the first company that we came to, it was Southern Korean test labs, but we've also been looking at Spain, Turkey, and a number of other countries. There are countries where it makes no sense to go to. For example, most of the means of protection are certified in Canada. Canadian, French labs, they will not even talk to you. They just, that's what they say. And in every country, they have their own peculiarity. A Southern Korean laboratory, when we came to them, they had 3 meetings with 3 test laboratories, and their eyes became wide open when they hear that this is a Russian company, and they start saying, they don't say no. They don't say no. They say, whether we don't have English-speaking specialists, and we cannot do the assessment of documentation which is not written in Korean language. Some say that they are too overloaded with projects and they are not ready to undertake it. And from the conversation, you can see that they don't have any desire to deal with Russian company. Once again, in a number of countries, like Italy, for example, they say that, well, we're ready to certify you, but if your product will comply to certain local regulations. And we understand their fears, because a certificate for compliance to the 2nd level of trust gives the right to sell certified programs to the bodies of authority. If you think that in Italy they don't have paranoics like our bodies of authority, you are greatly mistaken. Well, the whole first year it was communications with the test labs. We have stopped on PSI, and once again, the first meeting with PSI was a German analogy of stack. The first meeting with them was that yes, no formal blocks to accept your application, but as a result, it took approximately a year to make the decision, and not only the federal industry, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also participated in this decision, and federal police, because it's their analogy of our Federal Security Service. So before we got approval of all those organizations, between these three organizations, they didn't accept our application. After the application was officially accepted, and the work actually was started, then we faced the first difference between German scheme of certification from Russian one. It's a very strict organization of work. If you apply here in Russia, you apply to Stack. Stack have looked at the application, then you start certification, and then afterwards communication with federal authorities. You should forget about that. It's the problem of the test labs and the certification bodies. But in Germany it's different. In Germany you have applied, it has been approved, test lab starts working, and the first thing they do, you agree the calendar of operations, not only with the test lab but also with the federal agency, because for each application like that, federal agency separates their own expert which assesses all stages of the assessment. And due to the fact that they are very peculiar people, and it's a crisis, budget is being cut, specialists are being laid off, so a specialist has a lot of projects, so they count their time in time slots, 2 weeks per document. Therefore, if you are not able to give document for expertise in this 2-week time slot, well, you have to wait for the next time slot in order to look at your document. In Russia, you will never be able to see something like that. So what do you need for the second assessment round in order to receive the certificate for the second level of trust? Well, the assessment level of trust number 2 is the minimum level under which the test lab knows something about the internals of the product. The most important thing, the most important document that you have to provide is the security documents, which describe requirements and brief description of how you provide the protection in this certified product. Also, small top-level project documentation, functional specifications, and something that can be translated as project, but they call it design of product or architecture. It's a testing documentation and a standard user manual also, which is nothing special. The security target requirements to it are not different from Russian to English ones, to foreign ones, but there are certain peculiarities. In Russia, if you certify a product, for example, for the compliance of technical specifications, and I'm not going to show these technical specifications to the clients because they are defined to pass the certification and not to demonstrate functions of security of the product. In a framework of CCRI, it's all totally different. You have to show to the client not only a certificate, but also the security target and reports of certifications. That's why, well, the procedure of certification is needed so that client not only would be confident that somebody have tested their software, but also made sure what was the main idea of this test and what it was tested for. After the completion of the procedure of certification, the objective and security target and reports on certification are being published in 2 places. The first one, commoncriteriaportal.org, which is a central portal of all this international system of certification, plus in a number of countries like Germany, these same documents are being published in the site of federal body which was done the certification. It gives me a certain simplicity to the work for those who prepares the work for certification, because the objective target should not be, but on the portal you have to select security target for similar products. You look at which one of them is closer to your product, and then you have to modify the requirements and change the department with the functions of the security of the product. Yes, of course, there are peculiarities. For example, the German test lab criticizes those which are written by the Canadian labs, Canadian manufacturers, and assessed by the Canadian lab, because they said, well, it does not comply to the common criteria, and they point by their fingers, and it does not comply. Truly. For example, there are differences on how people assess the assessment of dependencies, some things which a normal developer don't really understand. And I've been working in Russian system of certification course of 5 years, including the assessment of ISO 15480, and I don't know all these peculiarities even today, because it's very unusual for the IT guy to dig into such things. Well, the first thing that you're being required when you come to provide the project documentation for the product is a scheme of dividing this product into subsystems and a detailed description of the interface of cooperation between those systems. Well, briefly, I'm going to tell you what is that. Basically speaking, developers should tell them, well, look, my product consists of these modules, plus it has the operating system and a database. Operating system and database don't touch it because we are not certifying them, but we certified these pieces of my product. The first thing that you face here is the fact that the ideology of the common criteria assumes that with the development, development was done formally. First, you have designed from which subsystems your system will consist of. Then you have designed how the subsystem is divided into modules. Then you formally divided how modules will cooperate with one with another. And then developers started developing all of it. Well, it's understandable to everyone that in reality it never happens like that, because the product that is being developed in the course of 10 and more years, it's a constant iteration process, and the idea that you had in the beginning, it doesn't work right now. And right now everything is being changed right now. So the first thing that you do is that you sit behind the table, you look at your product, and then you say, well, let's call this subsystem of reporting, and this let's call subsystem of scanning, and this will be called the database of knowledge. Describe it by schemes, show it informational exchange between the systems, and give it for certification, and then pray that this will be accepted and nobody will ask you more detailed questions about how does this look in reality. Well, what is required from the point of view of project documentation? Formally, in the specification, you can include any requirements to the security. You can take them from the second part of the common criteria. It's a catalog of requirements with certain rules which allow you to change and modify those requirements. Plus, you, in a compliance with certain principles, you can formulate open requirements to the product, but there's a certain set of requirements which you have to include into the product, even though formally there is no such requirement, but they will make you do that. The most important thing which should be available there, you should justify that the set of requirements that you have provided to them, if these requirements have been fulfilled, then protection of the product cannot be avoided. And when you speak about unavailability of the means of protection, they look at certain limited set of attacks related with brute force facing protocols, etc., etc. And this is also complexity of the mechanisms of dividing the authority, so that it would be impossible to violate access rights or get around certain access rights checks and absence of errors of the buffer overflow, whose usage would be give the possibility to discover the logic of the program operation. And when you read the general assessment methodology and you see smart words about how everything should be operated and well described in the documentation, it looks awful. You understand that you have to write a lot of papers with a model of violators, a model of threats, but in given a project documentation, it was written by the consulting company because we ourselves wouldn't be able to do it for the first time. But in reality, each of these justifications takes half a page of writing. Hey guys, look, there is no ways around it. If you have properly built the role policy, so the violator will have no possibility to get around it and do any critical operation. It's not as awful as it might seem. If you have done this certification once, then you'll be able, and you can use these documents as templates for writing a project documentation for other products. Functional specification, it's the worst document that we ever faced, and its development took us 6 months out of those 11 months that we've been involved in this project on certification of the product. So what is to be actually done? It's a detailization of the architecture down to the level of interface description. While, for example, we have interface of cooperation between scanning Max-Quadro kernel and database of knowledge. In order to certify the interface, one needs to One needs to provide detailed description in which protocol you communicate the scanning kernel with database on launch. What is the access objects? Who is the subjects of these access rights? Which operations are being done? Which rules of distribution of the access rights are being followed? Everything should be described in very great detail. And if well, it's good if you use standard protocols, then you can easily give assessments to the documents which describe these protocols, RFC or documentation for the developer of this program module. If you realize your own protocol, this protocol has to be specified by you. You have to write your own specification which describes all of this. We were lucky and we have not been inventing those protocols. We have used already predefined ones. The level of detailization is really high one. The single interface is the interface of communication with the operating system. Well, just a second. Stumbling block that we often face is the procedure of identification and authentication when these procedures are being written separately, but we were lucky we have been using the procedure of authentication realized in the operating system. How usually the authentication looks in the software product. User enters password. From this password, the hash tag is being calculated. The hash is being compared to hash which has been stored in a database. As soon as the test lab hears the word hash, the first question they ask you, what about cryptography? Which one do you use? If you use cryptography over the operating system, well, it's normal. If you write a hashing function yourself, well, same way like in Russia, you face the requirement that your hashing function should comply to the internal standards they have. In Germany, it's FIP 140. Basically speaking, just due to the fact that you have used your own hashing function, in addition to ISO 15080 certification, you also should certify your cryptographic module. And certification of cryptographic module in Germany is not less complex than certification in FSB in Russia. So in our case, we had to go through all our problems in order to find out so that we don't write our own hashing function and we have used only operating system functions. Well, the level of digitalization is a very high one, and in project documentation we face the fact that it's insufficient just to describe that you have this interface. In the ISO 15408 you have very deep classification of the interfaces. Interface class A1 has these. It's an interface which has these properties, and this has A2 interface. And the project depends, and I don't know what is the difference between them. And all the work was done for us by the consulting company. And I do hope that in the future we will just follow the similar pathway, because products are built on a similar architecture. Well, therefore, in order to be assessed and the product be certified, you have to describe in great detail the mechanism of controlling access in your product, and there are stumbling blocks that you have to overcome as well. As I've told you, in the project documentation you have to justify impossibility of getting around the mechanism of security. One of the directions of getting around it is the access limitation function. It didn't say properly anywhere, but there's a requirement which is followed by all schemes of certification that I faced. Hey guys, please write good role model. You have the set of roles and operations which can be executed over the access objects, and basically speaking, the mechanisms of principle of giving those roles to the users. Well, we understand this set of rules, and in operations we can see, for example, that bad roles combinations, well, for example, the role of creating in the payment applications, creating of payment and approval of payment. These roles are not applicable, and applying them to other levels of separating the access, well, it might be applicable. And test labs, they can work with role model. If in your product you have discrimination model, when the user can be the user when creating the object, he can use the any set of rules, but for other model there's no ready models of assessment. Is it a proper or improper distribution of roles? So you have to adjust your system of rules. You show to the test lab and say, hey guys, no, it doesn't work this way. Do this and this. Define that you, for example, have this set of rules, and this is a role of operator, and this set of rules, it's the role of, let's say, analytics, who looks at the reports. And define please which rights should comply to which roles, and include it into the user documentation, and then you will think that this limitation for usage of your product, irrespectively to having discrimination policy of access rights, where you can do whatever you want to do, the company which uses certified product will be obliged to follow these settings and requirements, and not being able of making step to the right, step to the left. And with following these conditions, test lab is ready to do the assessment, and certification will agree with this assessment. Well, after all this has been described on the level of the interface, then you write the next document, some more detailed description of realization, project of the top level, or specification of design. Well, we also have to post in test lab all the internals of the product, database schemes, or the same protocol specifications that I was speaking about. Interface description down to the API function description. Why do we need it? Well, first of all, so that the test lab would be able to be sure that everything that is being defined in the product is being fulfilled. Then there's another directions in activity of certification is independent search of vulnerability in the software products, which has to be done by the test lab. So the scheme of databases and APIs and specifications of protocols is needed, so that the first phasing of protocols is being done in the black box mode in order to understand which parameters, where the buffer overflow happens, and etc. etc. So all these has to be described and shown to the management of test lab. Therefore, if you use some open source products, you have to give a documentation for these products. Well, what documentation you have, that's what you have. This could be a URL link to the site of developer, where they describe the header function of the products. This could be manuals, this could be anything else, but information should be available, of course. Well, if software module was written by you, then you'll have to write the specification alone, because there's not where else where you can take this information, because it's another stumbling block, because which library can be written 10 years ago, and developer who was writing 10 years ago, but he left the company, you have to reverse this library, and in a reverse cycle you have to write the header file and include it into the documentation. Difficult, long time, but you have to do it. There's a trick which is recommended by the test labs itself. Hey guys, if you don't know how this library was built, tell us that this is not part of your product, it's the object of environment. It doesn't matter that it's a part of your product, nobody cares about it. So the border of assessment is built in a part of the product. Well, we play here and we don't play here because this is not assessment. And this is a legal trick. It is defined by ISO 15408, and everybody agrees to it due to the absence of other options. So the level of utilization is a really high one, insufficiently just to describe what calls these functions, but you have to describe the diagram of sequence, how these operations are being executed, whose requirements have been announced in the objective and security, all the way to the sequential call of the function and which data between these calls is being transferred. Fortunately, this is to be done only for those functions, for example, if we have a requirement to authentication. Well, only for those functions which are called during the check of the password and user. Top management. Fortunately to us, we had very good top management, and we need three things actually. The user manual, description of the interface and all the operations which are related to usage of the security function of the product, and this can be book or PDF document, or it can be URL file built into the program. Both of them are accepted. The second one is the installation manual. Well, let me formulate it. for the most of the software products, you can install it with a certain set of options, and these options you can play with. But when certified product has been installed, you should have a guarantee. You will need all the instructions which are needed for the correct functioning of the certified objective. Therefore, in addition to the fact that you have an installation manual, you need additional document to the manual. Hey guys, you should know if you use certified version, then you have to put this option, or this way you have to disable this module, or add additional software, or to do additional preset in a configuration file. That's why when we do the certification, all these settings are being reproduced, and variants like, oh, we forgot to switch something on, it doesn't work anymore. The settings are well fixed. Plus, the third thing which is required from you is to describe the procedure of delivering the product to the client in such a way so that to the client you would have a delivery of the product and the manual for this product. And your client should be convinced in the usability of this product. For example, he should check that he received the necessary version of distributive and the control hashtags and ID numbers that were given and shown in the interface. And the same thing is related to the top management. It's assumed that the client receives an archive which has been included, installer includes into, and that's here's a control some. User manual, here's a control sum. Special settings after installation, here's a control hash sum. It's described as a document, and then it's been included into documentation for the test lab. The most unexpected thing that we have faced ourselves is the representation of the testing documentation, presenting it to the management. The second assessment level of trust is different from the first trust level, is that the developer should provide lab with a full set of tests which are done according to their testing of the release, and the testing lab does the selective check. What is so unsimilar to it? Well, we have good testing ourselves, and we have, well, for each function you have dozens and hundreds of tests, some of them done automatically, some of them are done manually. But the test documentation is done in Russian language, for example. And to translate all this tree of tests to English, it's a very, well, it's not difficult money-wise, but it's from the point of view of time, it's not acceptable. So when we came to the lab, what should we do in this case? They looked at us, they looked at our testing logbook, and they said, well, we do need full testing documentation for you, but not so full detail-wise. So as a result, the output, we follow the same way like Russian test labs are doing. We have written not a fake, but certain programs and methodology of tests demonstrate workability of other interface accessible to the internet. We do testing, and we have described the tests and details. We don't toss it like that. Every function is being tested by 10 different tests, but as a result, when we put to the laboratory the document that was sent, they said, well, you see the password out of 4 digits, and user has entered. Authentication works. Tests for buffer overflow already are not being provided by us, even though this testing will also do. And the depth of detailization of test documentation is required on a step-by-step basis. You have put checkmark here, you have introduced text here, you have pressed this button here, and other output you should see this picture. Pay attention in red color. This is the information that tester should see in order to achieve good test passing. Analysis vulnerabilities is what is done by the test lab. It's for the second assessment level. It's a testing by the black box method. Test lab has no source codes. They are provided only by the 4th level of assessment. They receive the product which they can turn and can do whatever he wants with this product, whatever he can. And by the way, Russian or Western test labs, none of them will declare what really how really they discover vulnerabilities in certified programs. But those who know our company, you know that our analysis of protection is our key function, and our products are also being analyzed by us, and both with the use of our hands of hackers, and with the help of our own analysis of protection projects. But at this moment of time, we did have a certain problem. What if Germans do have some sacral knowledge that we have missed? If they will, we had a 0-day vulnerability, and then we'll not be able to restore. Our reputation will be destroyed from the beginning. But we were able to see how the testing is being done. Our beta tester said, "Fool." Because everything they've been doing, it's phasing of a black box mod protocol, and they were not able to discover some of these protocols, but they could able to see that upon the relations between functions, that a certain parameter is being transferred. Let's put it in special numbers, and then we'll see what really happens with those variables. And then we do a search of well-known vulnerabilities. Just look at the CVE database of whether the software module that is being used by us, well, we did have small problem. By that release, we have fixed the problem. Those who have installed Max Patrol and was checking our machine with the Max Patrol in the composition of the Patrol, they've seen OpenSSL library. It had some vulnerability. And we're not able to deny this library because it's used for scanning of certain ancient hardwares, so we have to use vulnerable version. But fortunately to us, realization of this function in the library was not used. We have not included it into delivery, but this program also exists, and sometimes developer they have to use libraries with well-known vulnerabilities. Well, that's it. Out of everything that I've told you previously, and what we have learned about the analysis of vulnerabilities, they do approximately 30% out of what we do with our analysis of penetration tests. The result of certification is a report of certification, and in principle the process looks the following way. You have transferred documents to the test lab. Test lab, for this document, has made a report. The next document, assessment report. Each assessment report is being tested by certification body of authority, and why a BSI expert writes this 50 to 60 page document, report on certification. Like we've been checking these software, the check is such, limitations were such and such, result positive. Otherwise, there won't be no report on certification, and the report on certification becomes an integral part of certified product. While giving the certified version of the product, you have to give in the certificate, security note, and report on certification. I don't know how other certification schemes are working, but right now we're working with the Spanish scheme, but right now we have not received the certification. But in German scheme of certification, as soon as you passed all these steps, you also have the chance to receive the certificate, and they are not going to give it to you before you will take certain obligations. It's the same obligation to provide a client with full set of certified documents. So BSI roughly is carefully looking at the fact that a trademark of John PSI wouldn't be used for bad marketing. In other words, they want to make sure that the purchaser of this product has all the information about the security function and its realization. And in the security order, there's a very great description of all the limitations, of all the threats from which it consists. Description of limitations that they have to face. The fact is that sometimes with certification for RISE 408, well, you use a product which client-server relations is done through the HTTP open protocol, and due to certain ideas, you cannot use encoding so that you wouldn't lose. For example, you cannot use SSL, so you don't go to a certification of cryptographic modules. So what bad developer does? He said the following. He said, let's use HTTP, then we will write in documentation that the product can be used only in isolated network, no remote access. It's defined in security call, then certification is done, certificate is given with this limitation, then they sell product, and a security document and client doesn't know about this limitation. He looks at the product, tests it in real conditions, and then authentication data are passed through the open protocol through the internet. In order for this not to happen, BSI requires so that all documentation, security report, certification report, which describes of it, all this documentation has to be provided to the client, published on the site of developer, and it has to be transferred and described in the manual on delivery of the product. If you will try to hide and remove from the site these documents, this is a formal certificate recall reason. Well, making a resume out of above said, what is the main difference of the Western certification schemes from Russian one? Well, practically there is no difference. We didn't see principal difference except for some peculiarities that I've been telling you about. We've liked the approach, and it's a Russian approach. Well, iteration. What is this iteration is all about? We have written the project documentation, then we give it to the assessment, and then document is bad, does not complete the requirements. It was returned to us with notes, then we send the next version, then it will be assessed, then we'll find other problems, and this process will be iterated until we will bring this document to the ideal condition. So there is no situation that, oh, your document does not comply, goodbye. No, they don't do it. And communications with them, you communicate with the test lab and more, and with certification bodies as well. And this communication is done, well, you can write a letter through the email and they will answer you. But the openness for communication, I really like that, because some questions, they had to be solved directly and organizationally. For example, I will stop on this. We've liked the requirements to the depth of detailization, because in Russian certification you can submit project documentation in more general sense, less detailed. But I liked the deadlines and cost. The deadlines, 1 year for certification, 1 year for decision making, it's too much. The cost of certification, well, 3 times higher than similar certification in Russia. If you, well, we didn't like in Russian one, we know that it's unavoidable the fixation of versions. For example, we have submitted for 1.0 version, and if we're lucky, this will be running 1 more year, and the body of certification has given us certification. The previous version has already been outdated, but the client has to use old version, or he bought certified version, but legally or illegally he used the real one. And then also we didn't like the work of Post of Russia. The certificate was produced 30th of April, and by now I have not received it on paper. Coming back to the openness of certification, well, this is a real problem right now. Document has not been received, but it was given. Well, the problem was solved very quickly. I've been writing a letter to the body of certification. I say, what can be done? I say, well, this morning, Friday, it was sent, and today finally I see the electronic version of certificate and electronic version of document with all the necessary signatures and stuff. And I hope that in Russian certification scheme, similar system will be applied as well. Well, that's all I wanted to tell you. If any questions, I will answer them outside of this room.